And also looking at mental health, not as mental health only, but as brain health and brain health as it connects to body health as well. Again, coming back to that more holistic and integrative view of what the person is and who the person is and how everything is connected to one another within an individual. So I would say that my view and my understanding of it has expanded from
Awekenge, this is Mental Mythos, hosted by Asekho Toto.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Mental Matters. I'm your host, Asekho Toto. And before we dive into today's incredible conversation, I have a small favor to ask. If you enjoy what you hear today, please take a moment to rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but also helps others discover the valuable insights we share every week. And if you find today's episode particularly inspiring or insightful, don't forget to share it with your friends, family, or anyone you think could benefit from it. Thank you for your support. It truly means the world to us. Now, let's get back into our conversation.
I'm just interested.
Yeah, traumatic brain injury. So TBI stands for traumatic brain injury. And we utilize that as not only a classification when the injury actually occurs, but also when we are working with clients to be able to provide them with the proper support.
Okay, I think now we can get into our initial conversation.
Sure.
Can you tell us about your journey into the field of psychology and what drew you to specialize in areas such as TBI, PTSD, and military psychology?
Sure. So yeah, my journey into psychology started when I discovered very early on that I really enjoyed spending time connecting with people and listening to their stories about themselves, their life, and what their aspirations were instead of just going in and out of a room and diagnosing them and hoping that medication would work. And I'm not opposed to medication management, but I'm just saying that my calling was really more towards being able to connect with individuals for longer periods of time. So originally I was slated to go into medicine and be a doctor, and I was in an accelerated program. But like I said, I quickly figured out that I really wanted to spend time talking with my clients, with my patients, and that's what led me to the doorstep of psychology. And once I took my first biopsychology class, I was sold. I was absolutely elated. So I knew I found my calling at that point. Yeah.
In a way of specializing,
Mm-hmm.
why it's in a way of definitely also I have some knowledge around mental well-being, actually the field of psychology, just from reading things, reading case studies, reading papers in terms of as TBI, PTSD, and military. Why specializing on those three specifically?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the first opportunities that I had coming out of graduation, coming out of college, was with a facility that focused specifically on traumatic brain injury. And why that intrigued me, well, it tied very closely into and allowed me to apply a lot of the knowledge that I'd acquired in my biopsychology background. But also, I felt a calling to help individuals who had this diagnosis because it wasn't something that was really emphasized. Not many people knew about TBIs, and oftentimes TBIs are not seen, right? When we think about injury and we think about traumatic brain injury, oftentimes we'll think there's going to be something visible, like a broken leg or a broken arm or, what have you. There'll be something very noticeable. But traumatic brain injuries are not like that. They're unseen oftentimes. And because of that, they've been, in my opinion, neglected as an area of support, of research, and what have you. And especially back then when I first started and got into that world, it was even less prominently known. So, and addressed and supported. So now with time, there's been a lot more attention given to that area and the need for support there. And I'm so thankful for that. But certainly early on, it wasn't really as prominent. So traumatic brain injury and PTSD is something also that our military populations definitely experience more often than not, unfortunately. And that's also what helped me with deciding that I wanted to serve that population as well.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of mental health in general, actually, in mental well-being in general, how has your perspective on mental health changed from when you were studying psychology until now? What difference have you seen in terms of understanding what is truly mental health?
That's a great question. I mean, if I understand your question correctly, you kind of cut out there for me a little bit, but through the years, from when I first started to study in this area of psychology and understand mental health, my passion and love for mental health support and care has gone from simply understanding the functionality of the brain and behavior, the mind and behavior, and that connection there, the connection of the mind, body, spirit, to one that is a lot more holistic and global within the person and within the person's environment. And also looking at mental health, not as mental health only, but as brain health. And brain health as it connects to body health as well. Again, coming back to that more holistic and integrative view of what the person is and who the person is and how everything is connected to one another within an individual. So I would say that my view and my understanding of it has expanded from simply studying the connection of the mind, body, and spirit to looking at even more of a nuanced view of the mind, body, and spirit, and looking at the individual holistically and in through the lens of different areas of the person's life.
I as also as I have been doing this podcast, I think it has been 4 or 5 years, I'm not quite sure, and talking about mental well-being and interviewing different people, different different backgrounds, different races, different fields in terms of being able to interview psychologists, interviewing people who religious people, interviewing different people who has practiced different ways of taking care of their mental well-being. I realized that at first I thought I knew back in 2020, I thought I knew mental health, but now I look at it and something that I'm learning every single thing, every new thing, every single day when I on my laptop having different conversations. And Eleanor's these statements for goes to my next question. Psychology is it's a broad industry. It's just a broad. So how does your experience in marriage and family psychology influence your approach to mental health in a broader context?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the first part of your question.
How does your experience in marriage and family psychology influence your approach to mental health and in
Sure. Yeah.
context?
Yeah, no. So, I mean, marriage, it really, the degree that I got was called marriage and family psychology, but I really look at that more as relationship and family psychology. So no matter where you are on your relationship journey, that's what we look at. And that's what I certainly like to look at. How has that influenced, whether you're deciding to be in a relationship with somebody else or you're focusing on the relationship that you have with yourself, there's a relationship that you need to look at, right?
Mm,
And so wherever you are in your journey, right? And whatever type of relationship it is that you are experiencing or engaged in, be it again, like I said, with yourself, with another person romantically, with your work world and work family, with friends, with business associates, etc. Those are all relationships that have the ability to influence our lives, right?
mm,
And certainly influence our affect and our mood in our day to day. So I think it's an important component to take into consideration when looking at an individual's overarching mental health and where they're at with everything. So relationships, no matter what type of relationship, is always going to come into play and be part of one's story. Yeah.
And for someone who, let's say, who's dealing with mental well-being, actually, let me rephrase the question. Do you believe in that thing of one person of focusing on their mental health and neglecting relationships?
Do I believe in one person focusing on their mental health but neglecting a relationship?
Yep.
Um, well, that's not necessarily what I would ever recommend, but what I would say needs to happen is individuals definitely need to focus on their mental health and then be very forthright with what it is that they can give in any type of relationship, however little or big that might be. So if you're in a period in your life where you do need to focus on your mental health more so than other aspects of your life, then the important thing to do to maintain and nourish and nurture the relationships that you're in is be honest about it, be genuine about it, and say, this is how much time I do have to give to this relationship. And this is what I'm doing to work on myself. And even if you feel you need to, you can say, I'd love and appreciate your support for that mental health journey and, being able to spend time with myself right now. So I think wherever you're at, again, wherever you're at with your journey, it's important to be very forthright and genuine with what your needs are and what you're able to give and what you want to receive from the relationships that you're in.
Mm. The reason why I actually asked this question, and also it wasn't part of my notes that I was preparing. It's something that when you spoke about what you deal with in terms of what you specialize in it when it comes to marriage and family psychology, and
Mm-hmm.
that is something that you studied for, a degree that you studied for. And
Mm-hmm.
in a way, I ask you in a way of I've been there actually. I've been there of not knowing how to take care of my mental well-being, of trying by any means to be in a relationship just because I want that sense of love, that sense of someone is out there for me. And whenever I go through such thing, I have this certain person, and this person won't ask too many questions in a way of they will validate my feelings, they will just be there for me. And one thing that I've realized is the fact that I was in the wrong of not even asking that certain person that how are you doing? How are you doing okay? So I was a bit of
Mm-hmm.
selfish. That's where I took a decision that I need to take care of myself and
Mhm.
being away from relationships, because in some way that relationships requires time, and time is
Mhm.
not something that I don't have. For example, here in South Africa, it's at night. I'm doing this around 11 p.m.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's quite difficult to find time for relationships. And in a way, I thought you would give me some bit of advice on that, but
Well, I can't technically give you advice, but what I would say is, certainly for those of us who have busy, busy lives, like it sounds like you do, one of the things that I always like to suggest is being able to look at what you do have the capacity to do, right? But if you're in a position where you're saying, you know what, I really want to invest in a relationship, but I'm also feeling like I'm pulled in another direction with not having enough time. Again, think about what types of relationships can help fulfill your life in the meantime, right? While you work on yourself and while you invest in, other things that are of importance to you, like running this podcast, which you're very dedicated to, I can see. So, like again, keeping balance, I think, and, being able to be forthright and authentic and genuine to what you really can do is very important, because then you're being honest with yourself and you're being honest with the other people who are in your life with what you can give and what your needs are as well.
such an intriguing answer. Let's. I would say I would like to move to the diversity and inclusion, and
Yeah,
something
absolutely.
that we don't put in mind per se in terms of mental health, in terms of diversity. You've worked intensively with diverse population, including native population and the LGBTQ plus community. How
Mm-hmm.
how through working with these different groups of people, how they how do their mental health needs differ, and what commonalities have you observed through this experience
Right. Between which populations?
from diverse populations, including native populations and the
Oh,
LGBT
yeah.
plus community?
Sure, sure. I mean, each population, so to speak, just in quotes, right? Each subset of the population, I would say, has their specific needs. But one thing is that while there are some differences, there are more similarities than not, right? And at the end of the day, what ends up being very important is being able to speak the language of the community that you are working with, right? So it's important, and in so doing, in speaking their language, in understanding their culture, right? You will then be able to have insight into what their needs are and how those needs, of course, will then be unique to each individual, within those communities. But it's really important to learn their language, a population's language, and understand culture within that population to be able to align with and build rapport with the people that you're working with. So the differences, now you asked about differences. Again, I think the differences occur in the like in military world, there's a military culture, there's a military language that is important to know so that you can understand what they're referencing and referring to in terms of what stresses them out and what works for them and doesn't work for them. And the same thing again applies to other populations as well, including the LGBT plus community.
Mm.
So the needs are similar, right? But the different nuances of each of those populations are what differ.
Mm. You mentioned in terms of this thing of culture, and so a question popped on my head in terms of that when you mentioned culture. You have worked with military, you have worked with being in a military psychology, and something that when you say military, I assume that both genders as male and female. In this perspective of males, would you say that they were opening enough to talk about mental health? The reason why I'm asking that question is the fact that there's this culture around men of not talking about mental health,
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
around of you shouldn't talk about your emotions. If you talk about your emotions, you are not man enough.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting that you asked that question because I think not only can we, identify that for specific genders, and men for sure, but also amongst different cultures. So like when you add gender stereotype with cultural stereotype, then it's like a double whammy, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
there
yeah.
are a lot of people get men in certain cultures, right? For example, just an example, will feel like they don't have the space or the ability to express themselves, not only because they're men, but also because culturally it might not be the norm. It might not be something that is encouraged, right? Um, so yes, to answer your question, yes. Is there difficulty in that population specifically with men? Yes, absolutely. But I think thankfully, because of where we're at with mental health and brain health being seen as very important, um, it's better than where it was when I first started in this field over 20 years ago. So, we've definitely seen growth. And I think the fact that we as a society, no matter what society you might be in, are starting to talk about it more. And there's a lot more awareness and advocacy around mental health and brain health, that men feel more comfortable being able to express themselves and talk and understand that getting mental health support and care is essential and an essential part of being successful, no matter where you're at in your life, whether you're just starting out in your career, whether you're an adolescent, whether you're a child, whether you're a business executive, at the top of the food chain in the business world. Mental health is now being seen as an important part of one's self-care, care, and overarching health.
I love the fact that you mentioned that no matter how where are you in the chain, definitely mental health will affect you. Something that we think that I feel like in a way people that work too hard think actually let me not say work hard but say people who are at the top think that having having mental problems doesn't in a way that don't affect them, but the reality of the world is the fact that there are the most people that are affected by mental health because of the burnout, because of the fatigue, because you want to
Oh, for sure.
and
Yeah, yeah.
I was talking with a guest whereas Momoko a guest from I think from States, from Momoko, she moved to the States after she graduated. I think she also did psychology, where we spoke about grief, and in a way, I mentioned the fact that in in a way of me dealing with grief, I used work as an excuse, as something, as a coping mechanism of not out the actual grief of just passing the time of allowing myself to not think about it because once I stop thinking about when I stop and think about it, I will start from scratch and have to process all the emotions. I have to just be within my feelings, as I've said, the thing of culture and also men of not showing emotions, and in a way I think it is the thing of being raised in a community where men have normalized the thing of not talking about their mental well-being. Why would I talk about my mental health when I'm a man? I just can just ignore the feelings, just move.
Yeah.
And I know that through working, I won't think about it, that fatigue and
Mhm.
something, some of the stigmas that as a podcaster and as a huge advocate of mental well-being and mental health that I'm trying to break, mostly on men. No offense to men,
Mhm.
but if
Yeah.
you look at the stats really are alarming when it comes to men and
Yeah.
when it comes to mental health, I don't know lie. So, and also within teenagers, suicides
Mm.
rate are up. I don't know lie.
Oh, yeah.
That's why I try by any means to talk about men's mental well-being. And yeah, I'm just berbering. I think I'm talking too much. I am talking too much.
Oh no, this is great. It's great. No, I think I hear what you're saying, and I love the fact that you're advocating for men. And I also appreciate the fact that you're nodding to the need for mental health care for everyone, no matter the gender, which is great.
Mm,
Um, and I, of course, am an advocate for everyone getting mental health, and having that as part of their lives. But you're right. I mean, there's a stigma that comes now. Going back to one of your earlier points, like there's this whole thing called executive burnout for a reason,
mm,
because individuals who are high up there, and have reached, so to speak, that top position, an executive level position, feel oftentimes the need to maintain themselves a specific way, and that prevents them from getting the care that they need. Or maybe they just don't feel like they have the time initially until they hit a
mm,
wall, and then
mm,
there's the burnout, and then the burnout is leading to, or has a lot of different symptoms and components associated with it. So it's very real. It's a very real problem. And in general, depending on what country you're in, I would say, I put that as a caveat. Certainly in the United States, we have this mentality of work, 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 work. Work becomes life. And in other parts of our world, I have seen and also experienced the fact that it's not like that. The culture and the society is really more like, no, you live and work just happens to be part of it.
mm,
Now, um, I think we're lucky in that COVID did a lot to help with changing that narrative,
mm,
on a lot of in a lot of different ways. First, in being able to understand that there needs to be, even with more emphasis, a work-life balance, and what that means and how that's being defined is really interesting to see. Company culture is now incorporating hybrid schedules, remote schedules, and encouraging individuals and families to focus on themselves and on their families, and to utilize virtual and hybrid settings to be able to facilitate that, which is really phenomenal, I think. And I think it's also helping with renovating, the culture that we have, the work culture that we do have here in the States.
mm,
The other thing that COVID did was it opened up the world. Like once we went virtual with more prominence, we now had the ability to connect with the world, connect globally with more ease, and have that become more of the norm than something that's more unusual or not done,
mm,
not the standard. So I think between these two things, like a reformation of, work-life balance, and also accessibility increasing, that has certainly helped this conversation of, mental health in the workplace, of being able to help prevent burnout across the levels of individuals, in the hierarchical chain, at a company, and just kind of revolutionize what we're doing now. And it's still a work in progress, in my opinion, but at least it's a work in progress, and that's really exciting to see.
And yes, yes, in a way we are getting there. But I would, in terms of it is something different from here in South Africa because we haven't adapted to that thing of no, we need to adapt with new norms in terms of mental health in a workplace. It's something that difficult, and most people are, how can I put it, are burned out most of the time, and employees don't even bother such on introducing new policies when it comes to work in a way of mental well-being. That's when the government, because there was this bill that it was still needs to be passed through parliament, that it's an NPI, I think so, I'm not quite sure. Whereas it entails that everyone that is in need of mental health resources, they can get it. Not only mental health, but also medical,
Mm,
uh,
mhm.
everyone will get for free. But the initial conversation around that is the fact that people are asking, where will this money come from?
Mhm,
Problem
mhm,
they are facing. And people
mhm.
are quite, in a way, are quite skeptic about it because of the organization that came up with the bill. The
Mm, mhm.
organization, because it is known more about corruption. It's hands-on corruption. So that's another thing that people are skeptical about. But as much as in theory, it is a great initiative, but
Yeah.
um, mm, it's quite questioning. It's quite questioning. And in terms of you are a motivational speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you engage and inspire diverse audience? What techniques do you find most effective?
Oh my goodness. My first goal is always to try to connect with people, always, even when I'm speaking to large, medium, small audiences, no matter the audience size. The goal is to connect with them. And again, depending on where you're at and what group you're talking to, it's important to get to know them a little bit. So, one of the things that I always like to do is incorporate them in my discussion and engage with them during my discussion, depending on the topic and what the focus is.
Mm, 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 mm. How did you incorporate these things from a psychologist to a motivational speaker? That's actually those people that become motivational speaker are business people, entrepreneurs.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it's quite the first for me to hear that a psychologist has it's a motivational speaker.
Oh, really? Yeah, no, I mean, I think it kind of goes hand in hand. There's a percentage of the work that we do as psychologists that definitely does involve motivation anyway, in my opinion. And certainly motivation comes from inside of oneself, and that's what we try to encourage. So if I'm talking to a large audience, that's definitely what I like to tap into. But I think it's really important to remember that no matter the audience, right? People are usually there looking for motivation in some way, shape, or form in some aspect of their life, in any area of their life. Even if they're content with their life, motivation can sometimes look like, how do I keep that going? How do I maintain that? So knowing your audience, knowing what they might be looking for, knowing and understanding that there's a spectrum, a wide range of possibilities in that is really important when you're talking to a large audience.
And I'm seeing that to be almost out of time because the conversation went the other way, whereas
It's
it was
okay.
not the way that initially that I
That's the beauty of organic conversation. It's okay.
yeah. That's always what I push on this podcast, being able to have that organic conversation, that
Yeah.
conversation that will give the audience that no, this was an organic conversation and I have learned something from this. And also I believe that also I love those free roam conversations, whereas we speak as much as I asked 3 or 4 questions, and after that we've been talking about different things, and it was very interesting. Before I let you go, just 2 questions that I have for you.
Sure.
Uh,
Sure.
What advice do you have for podcast listeners who are interested in pursuing a career in psychology or mental health services? My last question is that for you is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience about your work or future projects?
Oh, sure. Thanks. Yeah. So advice for aspiring psychologists. Oh, that's like one of my favorite questions. First of all, the fun part about psychology is it is truly a subject that you will use in your daily living. So it is whether you're learning psychology just to learn psychology and have that be part of your curriculum in school, or you're looking to major in it and become a psychologist or a type of psychologist, it is 100% applicable across the board, across the life, which is so great to say. Unlike the calculus that I had to take, but but aside from that, my advice would be follow your passion no matter what area of psychology you do and no matter what you do in your life, because honestly, if you are loving what you do on a daily basis and you dedicate yourself to that thing that you're passionate about, you're going to be successful in it no matter what, is my belief. And you will be able to make it work. So following your bliss, following your passion, and looking at what those passions are and optimizing them into actionable goals is always the key, to working through whatever your goal sets are.
Mhm.
So my biggest like umbrella statement to that question would be, and piece of advice would be, always follow your heart, follow your bliss, follow your passion, and you will be successful.
What a powerful words. Actually, I'm planning after I am doing a diploma in tourism management, but I'm planning, or after 2 years, I'm planning to go back to school to a city
Uh-huh.
to do psychology. And
Oh, wonderful.
yeah,
That's so great. Yeah.
because doing this podcast, I don't see a need of not doing psychology, because I'm really intrigued on the conversation around mental health and being able
Mhm.
to be an expert myself on clinical psychology. I want to
Mhm.
to do clinical psychology because I've seen how powerful it is, and also my, I would say that my role model will be in terms of that field, Jordan Peterson, because the way he explained things, the way he is very influential, but in a way, I don't want to be popular like him, but being able to learn about people like Friedrich Nietzsche, Sigmund,
Mhm.
Carl Jung,
Right.
yeah,
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
Fyodor Dostoevsky, Franz
Right.
Kafka, those iconic
For
writers
sure. For
and
sure. Yeah.
big names. So yeah, and so and again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so
Of
much for
course.
being
Yeah.
here and also sharing your knowledge with us. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no, I'm so glad to connect with you. It was really a pleasure. Thank you for having me.